Hello, everybody. Tina Hogan Grant here with my regular Cuppa A Natter that I do every other Monday. I do it twice a month. I'm an author of soon to be 8 books. I have one coming out in January. But I like to bring authors into my home and we talk about books, writing, whatever comes to mind. And tonight I have 2 guests with me tonight. I'm super excited. I have Jonathan Haupt and Holland Perryman. How are you guys doing this evening?
Wonderfully. How are you?
I am super good. I am so excited to be talking to you guys. I've been looking forward to this for so long. Before we get started, I want to, Jonathan, I'm going to read your bio because I think it's an amazing bio. I did post it up above the chat, but in case people missed it, I just want to read it. And then I want to talk about the Pat Conroy Literary Center that you are involved in and the director. So before we get to that, let me read your bio. Jonathan Haupt is the executive director of the nonprofit Conroy Center and the former director of the University of South Carolina Press, where he created the Story River Books fiction imprint with Pat Conroy, named by Garden and Gun magazine as one of the top 10 things to love about the South. Haupt's book review and author interviews have appeared in the Charleston Post and Courier, Lowcountry Weekly, Beaufort Lifestyle, Savannah Morning News, Beacon magazine, Pink magazine, Southern Review of Books, and Southern Writers magazine Sweet Tea blog. He is co-editor of the anthology Our Prince of Scribes, Writers Remembers Pat Conroy, recipient of 17 book awards. He is host of the Live from the Pat Conroy Literary Center podcast on the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. In 2020, Haupt was recognized with the Doug Marlette Literacy Leadership Award presented by the Pulpwood Queens, the largest book club in the U.S. He also serves on the board of the South Carolina Academy of Authors and the Friends of South Carolina Libraries, as well as the advisory committee of South Carolina Humanities. What an amazing biography.
Thank you, Tina. And thank you for reading it exactly as I wrote it for you.
Oh, yes. I didn't want to change a thing. But I want to talk about the center. Yes. And the inspiration for the center was, of course, Pat Conroy. Yeah. And if you can, I understand that you actually worked with him. Can I ask you how your paths crossed and how was it like to work with him?
Sure. Oh, absolutely. No, that's a great story. And we're actually in the Conroy Center tonight. So we are.
Oh, fantastic.
We are in the very thing. Yeah. Pat was like the biggest thing in Southern literature, and deservedly so. And for those, completely unaware of Mr. Conroy, you probably are familiar with at least a few of his books that were made into movies. The Water is Wide, which was made into the film Conrack, Prince of Tides, The Great Santini, and Lords of Discipline. He had 12 books to his credit over a span of about 50 years, just simply amazing stories about this place that we're in, this beautiful low country of South Carolina. And Pat's books really spoke powerfully to people so that they felt like they knew him. But I did not know him at all when I came to South Carolina in 2004. I was hired to be a marketing person, a publicist at the University of South Carolina Press in Columbia, a few hours from where we are here in Beaufort. And one of the first things the press wanted me to do was call up Pat Conroy and ask him if he would write a blurb, one of those wonderful endorsements that appear on the back covers for a novel that was coming out. We had a phone number for him, but nobody at the press had talked to him in years. Maybe nobody there had ever talked to him. But that was my assignment, and I realized later this is kind of like a hazing ritual. I should have given it more thought, but I called the number that we had, and a voicemail answered, and it said, "You've reached the office of Pat Conroy. You can leave a message if you like. He might call you back, but probably not." And then it beeped, and then you just go, right? You either have something to say at that moment or you don't. And I rambled on for the full 3-minute recording time of that message. And when it cut me off, I wasn't even sure if I had said my name or my phone number, right? I thought he was a way to call me back. And I thought, wow, that went awful. I'm never going to hear from that guy. And he called me the next day. And Pat Conroy, who probably had 1,000 things to do and 100 other people he should have called, interrogated me for a half hour, maybe 45 minutes even, wanting to know who I was, what brought me to South Carolina, who I knew, who I was reading, what I thought of the place, what my hopes and ambitions were for my time here. You know, it was like a job interview, and it probably was, in fact, in Pat's mind, a job interview, because so many people were reaching out to him, and he wanted to help every single person he could. He was that kind of generous-hearted spirit, but you can't. When you're that outnumbered, you simply can't help everybody. I'm learning in my role at the center more and more. But something I said to him must have resonated, because at the end of that call, he gave me a half dozen different ways to be in touch with him, and said if I ever had another book I felt that passionate about, this was the way to do it. And that began, you know, about a 7-year relationship where I was one of hundreds, maybe even thousands of people who had that level of access to Pat. But when I became not the publicist for the press, but its publisher, its director, and I wanted to publish poetry and children's books and fiction and things I thought the state's flagship university press should be doing, Pat got very excited about all of that. And during the last 5 years of my life, he was my mentor. He volunteered to be my partner in a fiction imprint called Story River Books. And at a time when Pat could have been living on his lovely home, reading books and writing more of his own, he decided he wanted to be a teacher again, not just to me, but to the writers we were publishing. And he wanted to teach his millions of readers there were other writers that they could be supportive of. Pat believed, as I know you do as well, Tina, that the spotlight is meant to be shared. He would love what you do as an author, that you share that spotlight, that you welcome other writers and other literary folks into these conversations, because Pat believed wholeheartedly that that was our responsibility. That's what being a person on this earth was all about, helping other people. So those 5 years of seeing Pat do that and being the recipient of that generosity, of that mentorship, just completely transformative for me. So much so that when Pat passed away, March 4th of 2016, and his family and his friends and his literary agent decided they wanted to create a living legacy to him, not something passive like a statue, but something that really would continue to help writers, as Pat himself had helped writers when he was here to do it. And they created the Conroy Center. I was honored to be asked to be its director, and I left publishing behind to come here and do this. And it's been just a remarkable experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Well, I think they asked the perfect person with your history with Pat and the inspiration. And he's your mentor. I think it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. I couldn't think of anyone better. I really couldn't.
Thank you, Tina. I appreciate that.
But I do want to turn my attention to Holland for a little bit, who is an amazing young lady that I think is an inspiration to many. I mean, I'm going to read this bio. And when I read this bio, I thought, this girl can't still be in high school, but you are. It's unbelievable. But I'd like to read your bio, and then I'm going to have you tell us a story how you got introduced to the center.
Good.
Okay, so Holland's bio: the first intern of the Pat Conroy Literary Center and the Friends of South Carolina Libraries. Holland Perryman is a senior at Beaufort High School, where, see, I even read it. You are a senior at high school, where she's a student body president, captain of the girls' varsity lacrosse team, and winner of the second annual Ann Head Literary Prize for Short Story. Earlier this year, she founded the Diversity Awareness Youth Literacy Organization, now the largest student-founded club at Beaufort High. Her book reviews and author interviews have been published in the Charleston Post and Courier, Lowcountry Weekly, and the Southern Review of Books. She is also the first poet of any age to be twice featured in the Lowcountry Poets, corner segment of the ETC author interview series by The River. Amazing. Unbelievable. When did you have time to accomplish all this and go to school and be an intern?
I don't have a lot of free time. I don't.
But tell us a story how you first walked into the center and became involved. What appealed to you to the center and what drew you in?
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so when I was in 8th grade, we had to decide what we wanted to job shadow. That was one of our big 8th grade things, was picking a job, and then they would try to make a connection locally of someone we could shadow for a day. So I had friends that they wanted to job shadow the Chick-fil-A managers so that they could get free chicken, and that was great. And I had friends that job shadowed doctors and lawyers, and little old me asked if I could job shadow a writer, which in retrospect didn't make a lot of sense because, writers write, and I didn't need to study, 5 hours. So myself and a friend of mine both asked if we could job shadow a writer, and they really couldn't find anyone. So my mom, she kind of found someone in our church. My dad's a pastor, so they kind of did their networking, and they got me connected to an author. Her name is Stephanie Austin Edwards. That's her author. I know her as Mrs. Kaufman. And they made that connection. And then they also made the connection through our church to a woman named Margaret Evans. So we had these 2 writers, and I first went, and I think I had coffee with Margaret Evans first. And she worked with Pat Conroy on Beach Music, right? She was, she helped research for that book. So she knew him personally, in a bit of a different sense, but she gave me lots of great advice, and she was really, really wonderful, very encouraging, giving lots of good tips on sort of how to become a writer in a sense that can be, profitable, like a career. And she mentioned that I should definitely visit the Conroy Center. So then I met with Stephanie Austin Edwards, who I'll call her Mrs. Kaufman because that's more natural for me.
Okay.
I met with Mrs. Kaufman, and one of the things that she wanted to do was take us to the center, my friend and I. So she took us, and we walked in, and we did sort of a tour. She showed us around. She was a docent, so she had the full tour to give us. And as I recall, I think I saw Mr. Haupt that day, and I think I probably waved at him or something because she said, "That's an important guy." And I was like, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't remember seeing me on this day.
I have the vaguest memory that there were kids one day.
I did make an impression, is the point. But as I was there, one of the things that I noticed was this bulletin board with a bunch of notes and even napkins and stuff pinned into it that had notes to Pat Conroy.
Oh,
and
wow.
They visited the center, saying how much he meant to them and how much. I can see it right now. We still have it. It's right over here.
Oh, that is awesome.
Yeah, and it was all of these notes, and most of them were really emotional, saying that he saved their life in one way or another through his stories. And most of them didn't know him personally. They might have met him in a book line. They might have maybe crossed paths with him, but most of them just read his books. And for me, that was proof of this belief that I kind of had been quietly nurturing within myself, that stories really can be that powerful, and that stories can change people and change the world. And there in front of me were all of these notes proving that. It was like a transformative moment looking back. Wow. So all of that happened, and a lot of time passed as I was entering high school, trying to find out sort of who I was, who was I going to become at Beaufort High? What was I going to put my time into? What was I going to care about, really? And one of the things that came back up again was the Conroy Center, and wondering how I could remain connected to the center in some way. So we talked to Mrs. Kaufman and probably Mrs. Evans as well, and asked them, do they do that internship thing there? And they both were like, no, they don't. And that could have been the end of the story. But I was a persistent little 9th grader.
Uh-huh.
And, so I think I don't know how, I asked for an interview, I guess, and was granted an interview.
Even though they weren't
for a position that exists, mind you.
A
position
non-existent internship.
A non-existent internship. You need to understand, they didn't want me. They weren't looking for me. They were not on the hunt. This was entirely me hunting them down. So
you are going places.
I was definitely going places then, because here I am. I was determined. I don't even know what was in me at that point. But so I sat down for the interview with a full-scale resume of everything that I had accomplished up until that time. And I was 14. I don't even know what was on it. I wish I had a copy, because it could not have been anything worthwhile. It was a full-scale written resume, like, like very, I thought, professional looking. And so I came in for the interview, and I must have said something right because it worked out, and here I am.
Well, Jonathan, what were your first thoughts? You have a 14-year-old high school student come in asking for a position that was not available.
Yes.
What was your first thoughts?
Yes. When Stephanie Austin Edwards came in and said, "Wouldn't it be great if we had a high school intern?" I said, "No, that's a terrible idea. Let's not ever do that." And I had been mentoring college kids for years. I certainly understand the importance of a mentor, and Pat had been my mentor. But, Margaret Evans and Stephanie are both very dear to me, and I respect them tremendously. And they kept telling me, "You need to sit down with this kid. You need to sit down with her." And she comes in with a resume. She comes in ready to go, like it's a real thing. So I thought, let's give this a shot. But I was also quietly thinking, I'm going to find one or two small little things that I can give her to do that she can think is her internship, and then she'll get bored with this and get on with her life.
She'll get bored.
It was not what happened at all. The exact opposite of that happened. Holland impressed me at every single opportunity, going above and beyond my very high expectations. And I was coming at this with expectations that I had, again, for college-age students. I wasn't watering this down for a 14-year-old, but Holland delivers at that level every single time. It's remarkable to work with her, and it's remarkable to see how much she's grown in these 3 years as well. And because of Holland, we now have an internship program that she created, and other students now get to benefit from as well.
What an inspiration you are, Holland.
Well, what an inspiration he is. I've learned so much, and now other kids get to learn. It's really wonderful. I'm glad that that's the legacy, that it's getting passed on.
I think it's brilliant. Is his family heavily involved? I mean, the family that's left behind heavily involved with the center, his widow. And did he have children?
Yes, all good questions. Yes. Pat was the oldest of 7 siblings. He had 4 daughters, all of whom went into education in some form, all inspired by their dad. And 2 of Pat's siblings are writers as well. His widow, who you mentioned, Cassandra King Conroy, a writer in her own right, exceptionally talented writer of fiction and memoir also. And the family at all of those levels is involved in not only the creation of the center, but the operations of the center to this day as well. We couldn't do this without the Conroy family. It means the world to them that Pat's legacy continues on. Pat's legacy is a teacher in particular. So, yes.
And Pat's books, going back to Pat,
yeah,
all of his books took place in South Carolina, correct?
They did, not exclusively in South Carolina. Beach music in particular kind of wanders the globe, but they all come back to the Lowcountry. And this is a place that Pat first found when he was about the age that Holland is now. He was 15, 16 years old when he came to the Lowcountry, having been 23 other places. He was a military brat, so he grew up all over the country. But he just fell in love with the magic and the beauty of this place. And tomorrow we get to tell 4th graders about that. We're teaching a poem to 4th graders using some of Pat's writing. But the other thing that Pat found here, in addition to the beauty, was a really remarkable group of teachers. Jean Norris, who was his high school English teacher, Ann Head, who was a major Southern writer at the time, was Pat's first creative writing teacher, and Bill Dufford, who was the high school principal. All of these people just had a transformative impact on Pat when he was a Beaufort High School student. So for me to get to do that with Beaufort High School students right now is sort of completing that circle.
Right.
And when Pat arrived here and found this place and found those people and used it to figure out who he was going to be. This is Pat Conroy's story would have ended very differently had it not been for the Lowcountry.
Yeah, his legend is continuing on. I think it's brilliant. One of the books, of course, that I'm familiar with is Prince of Tides.
Yes.
It was made into the movie.
Yep.
Starring Barbara Streisand.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking up, of course, on the website of the center, and she is an honorary director.
She is an honorary board member. Yeah.
Board member. Along with John Grisham.
2 of our largest donors when the center was created. Their generosity made things possible very quickly that may not have been possible otherwise. They've both been very supportive to the vision for the center when it was certainly not what it is now, when we did not have this building. We started out in 700 square feet in a rental building And now we're in 3,000 square feet of a building that we own.
Wow. And you own it. You own the building.
Well, us and the bank, but we're working on
yeah, of course. Banks own everything. And it's a nonprofit center, a nonprofit organization. For those who have not read any of Pat Conroy's books, what would you recommend them read? And this is a question for both of you. What book would you recommend they read first, just to be introduced to his writing? And just give me a reason why. Why you pick this
first with that one?
The Water is Wide, and not just because that's what I read first. I do think that it gives a really good sense for who Pat Conroy was and who he became over the course of his life, even though he wrote that book really young, probably like 20 what?
Oh, wow.
26 or 27. So at the very early stages of his life, and definitely the beginning really of his writing career, but it's pretty incredible to read it and know who he became and what he ended up doing with his life, just looking at that legacy as a teacher. And it's a memoir, essentially. And it's telling his story about teaching the students on Defusky Island, which is a real place that I got to go to last summer, I guess. And these kids had never really had an equal education to their white counterparts on the mainland. And it was blatant segregation and blatant racism that was what was going on. And he went there and he transformed the lives of these kids many of them have gone on to do incredible things. So that's sort of his legacy that begins in this book. And I just think it's pretty incredible to start there, knowing what we know, became and how many people he impacted, because it started there. That spirit of generosity and of wanting to help others was always in him. So that's what I would start with.
And I bet he had so much more to write.
He did. He had unfinished books when he passed away, and books in his imagination. Always more books.
That reminds me of my father. My father passed away unexpectedly. He was an author. Yes. And I still have an unfinished manuscript of his. It was one he was working on when he passed away 10 years ago. And there's no way I can finish it. There's just no way, because it's my father's work, and I'm not inside his head. And it's just, you always wonder, what more would they have written? What more could they amaze us with?
Sure, absolutely. But what a treasure to have it versus not having it all, to know what he was putting his heart and his imagination near the end. Yeah.
And Jonathan, what book would you recommend for those that have not read any of Pat Conroy's work?
I get asked, all the time in this position, what's my favorite Pat Conroy book? And I always like to kind of reframe the question, because at Pat's 70th birthday party, he was asked which of his books was closest to his heart. And I like that phrasing. I like that phrasing a lot. He actually picked the one that Holland just suggested, the one.
Oh, okay.
Because he said at that 70th birthday party, quote, that was the magic year I became the man I was meant to be. And I love that, because he was describing not the year of writing the book, he was describing the year of being on the island teaching. So as a 70-year-old man with internationally acclaimed bestsellers, he was still thinking of himself first and foremost as a teacher. So I love that was his pick. That's not my pick. That's not the Conroy book that's close to my heart. It's a book called My Reading Life, which came out, I think, in 2010, maybe 2011. And it's this is particularly apt, because I know we're doing sort of a book club group that you host. So this will resonate with the folks who are watching. It's a book about Pat describing his favorite writers and his favorite books. But he can't do that without telling you about the family member or the teacher or the situation that introduced him to that book or that writer. So it feels very personal and very immediate. And unlike, say, Prince of Tides or Pat's novels, where he's trying to write a great work of literature, not just for this time, but for all times and all future readers, there's not that weight to the essays in My Reading Life. They feel like the conversations that you would have with Pat, that I got to have with Pat, in fact, on the screen porch or over the phone on late night phone calls. These are the very things that he would talk to me about. So that book reminds me exactly what it was like to be Pat's friend, to be in his circle. There were lots of different Pat Conroys over the 50-year writing life, but I can always find my Pat Conroy in my life. So I love that book.
Okay, I've written both of those down, because neither one I have read. I'm ashamed. I do want to just take a little quick break and say hello to the people that are here. If you just joined us, I'm here with Holland Perryman and Jonathan Haupt that are involved with the Brain Freeze Pat Conroy Literary Center. Sorry.
Yes.
And that's what we're talking about. But I want to say hi to a few people. We've got Janet Weinsberg is here, Carmen Guthrie, Katie Minsky, Denise Burt. And if you have any questions for them, go ahead and put them in the comments. I'll try and get to them. Raina is here. Peggy is here. B is here. I'm sure you know most of these people.
Katie was on your show under her.
Yeah, she's right here. There she is. She's calling you amazing. I think she was my last guest, my last one. She's great. I love her.
Yes.
Darlene Johnson is here. Let's see. Teresa Moyer, Stephanie Edwards says, glad to be watching you all.
Stephanie. It's the other. Yes. No, yes. There's more than one.
We have, this lady. Susan. Susan Peterson is here.
Sue interviewed us once. Yes, the first time we did an interview like this together, it was for Sue's Meeting Neighborhood. And
so let's talk about the center. This amazing center that has been, built in Pat Conroy's memory, legacy. What is the mission of the center, and what kind of events, activities does it provide?
Good question.
And this is a question for both of you. So whoever wants to take the lead, I'm game.
This one? Or
Sure.
You want to start this one?
Sure.
I've been given permission to start this one. So,
Okay.
The center.
I'm like, he definitely won't get it wrong.
Okay.
So, the center is two things kind of simultaneously, and I'll talk about the museum side, and then maybe you can jump in with the education side and talk about some of the events we do. So I mentioned that, we're in the center, we're in the building right now, we're in the education wing, we're in my office in the back side of the center, but the front side, the other end of it, is a museum, an interpretive center. So we have gallery spaces filled with exhibits. And I don't know what people assume that, a writer's museum would include. Maybe if they've never been to one, they think it's just going to be sheets of paper everywhere. But Pat's world was big and visual and larger than life. So we have a really amazing collection of artifacts that relate to his writing life, his teaching life, and also his family life, because that was so central to his writing as well. And just as a couple of quick examples, Pat never learned to type. His father, Colonel Conroy, wanted his son to be a fighter pilot and thought nothing would be more useless for my future fighter pilot son than knowing how to type. So Pat wrote everything out longhand. So we actually do have some copies of handwritten manuscripts. But the largest artifact we have is Pat's desk, which is beautiful and ornate and huge. And understandably so, when you're trying to write books for all times and all peoples, you need to feel important when you're doing that task. So having a big, important desk where you're writing these things is kind of central. And Pat's desk was always surrounded by books. He had somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 books in his personal life. Never just for show. He was in the habit of reading at least 200 pages a day, something he'd been doing since he was a sophomore in high school. So we have certainly not all 7,000 of those books, but a nice representative set that kind of frames the desk and some of the
love to see it
as well. And when people walk into that room, even though it's not our only room, they have sort of a funeral home experience where they feel both the presence and the absence of Pat Conroy. It's very powerful. I've seen people break down in tears at the sight of Pat's desk, him not in it, with the big chair, but no Pat Conroy. So it's nice to create that kind of emotional depth with exhibits, with things like that. We also have quite a lot of photographs. Pat lived in a very visual world here in the Lowcountry, and it's nice to celebrate that with visual artifacts. And we have his father's flight jacket. For those familiar with the book, The Great Santini, or the film, The Great Santini, the flight jacket figures prominently into it. There's a beautiful moment where Bull Meacham, the father, who's based on Pat's real father, wakes up his son, Ben Meacham, who's based on Pat, just after midnight on his 18th birthday, to give him this Vietnam era flight flight jacket to indoctrinate him into manhood symbolically in the novel. That never actually happened to Pat. He had to make that up for the novel because his editor insisted he do something to make that father seem nicer. So he created that, beautiful moment that never happened in his actual boyhood. But Don's real flight jacket is here. It's on the wall, and it's
That's
nice.
incredible. I do want to. You mentioned he never learned to type in his whole career. He passed
late in life, Pat's grandkids insisted that at the time email would be the way to stay in touch with him. So he reluctantly learned to type, but he never found his way to a shift key or any form of punctuation.
Wow.
So it took a little effort to translate a Conroy email. But,
so he would write all his books by hand?
He did, yes, longhand.
And then he would hire somebody or had somebody that would type it out for him?
Typists were incredibly valuable to Pat, and he tells a great story about a terrible typist in My Reading Life too, sort of cautionary tale about typists. But yeah, that was the pattern exactly. He would handwrite about 3 to 5 pages. That was a good writing day for Pat.
I have a picture on my wall of my dad that wrote his first book in 1979 on a typewriter.
Wow.
And I often ask myself, how did he ever write a book on a typewriter? I am so spoiled with the delete, delete, delete button.
Yeah,
I can't imagine actually.
We edit and write simultaneously.
It's just like second nature. Yeah. And I think of, and I remember when I was a child going into his office and there'd be piles of papers, scored them in a ball, thrown on the floor, start over. And I couldn't imagine writing even a chapter on a typewriter, let alone a whole manuscript. So
it's a different era, but a different mindset. And the same is true for handwriting too. Yeah. It just triggers different parts of the brain. I know writers to this day who have to handwrite the first draft or something that works for them, that just fires up the imagination, the physicality of doing it, of actually seeing your hand create the words, not a tangible space and not just on a screen.
I still have notebooks everywhere. I'm a note person. I can't put notes in my computer or put them in my phone. One reason being is I can never find them, but I know where my notepad is.
Yes. Well, journaling is a good instinct. You do that, right? Do you?
Well, I do it on a computer.
Okay.
So I
yes, but you do it, which is
I do journal.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, back to the question. I totally got off track there. I'm sorry. Yes. We talked about the museum.
Right. So that's sort of the museum side, and that's open to the public. During the pandemic, we started doing virtual tours, and we had virtual tourists from not just all over the country, but all over the globe. People who never would have been able to visit in person, even pre-pandemic, now had access to the center. And because of that, we continue to do virtual tours every so often, even now, even when we're open for in-person visits again. But again, that's only half. That's sort of the public-facing half. And the real value of this building, which is TripAdvisor's top-rated destination in Beaufort. Thousands of people come to have that museum experience every year, but many more than that actually participate in the education programs. So you want to say something about that, perhaps?
Yes. Such a significant part of Pat Conroy's legacy, like we just said, was being a teacher. That's why the Waters Wide is so valuable to me, and that was one of the missions of his life, and therefore what had to be the mission of his legacy was something active, like you said, not just a place or a statue, but something that manifested itself in a bigger way than that and connected to people in a different way. So a significant part of what the center does is teaches. We do workshops and events. We do presentations about Pat Conroy, but also about writing. We have book clubs meet. We have a very large festival that we do, and so much of, especially what I do for the center, I don't give tours for the center and stuff. What I get to do is be a part of those events, and either I'm introducing someone who's going to be giving some invaluable advice to the audience, or sometimes I get to given my 2 cents for some different things and help teach and help do interviews and stuff like that. So much of what we do are these real events. And since you mentioned COVID and going virtual, the same way that we got a larger audience for tours, we also got a much larger audience for any author interviews, any workshops, any video, virtual, anything. We were able to reach so many more people, and we were able to talk to authors we probably wouldn't have been able to talk to as easily, or if ever. If this happened in Zoom. So I felt really fortunate in, how much of a mess the world was, that we got to come out of that stronger and with more relationships and more connections and more support for the center and more the center supporting people.
Right, like we're doing right now. We're connecting you in South Carolina and California. Is the center open right now, or is it just virtual tours?
We're open for in-person tours, and we have people come in every day. We're open, and many days that we're not open, actually, too. Knock at the door, and if I'm here, I will happily do an off-hours tour. We do a lot of private tours in general, scheduled as well as unscheduled, because I never want anybody to come to the center and not actually get to see it, not get to have the experience that they're looking for. We've come to think of them, not so much as tourists, but as literary pilgrims. They're usually very intentional. It's not like they're wandering around and this is one of 7 things that they spot. They've already decided before they come to Beaufort they want to see the center. Maybe they've come specifically because of Pat Conroy.
Yeah,
I mean, it's on the top of my list. If I ever make it to South Carolina, where you are, it's on the top of my list. We're going. I'm there.
I would love for you to see the center.
I'm sorry?
I would love for you to see the center.
I would love to see it. I would love to see it.
Mm-hmm.
You say you also do writing workshops.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. Now, are those in person or are those online? And how does one go about finding that information? What kind of workshops do you do, and where are they posted, and how can they find out about signing up?
Leading about 2, sometimes 3 workshops every single month, and more often than not, they are virtual because we now have a student population that's nowhere near Beaufort, South Carolina. We've been in workshops with 20, 30 people, and I'll be the only one who's in Beaufort. Everybody else is somewhere else, and it's great to be discoverable like that. We have a website at ConroyLiteraryCenter.org. And we take registrations through Eventbrite, which most people, I think, are familiar with at this point. So it's very easy to sign up for workshops. We just finished our last one for the calendar year, which was a poetry workshop taught by our friend Bill Walsh from Georgia, Finding the Truth in a Poem, I believe it was called. But we're back in January. We've got a couple of different workshops going on then, including one that's very sort of Conroy appropriate about writing family stories, writing memoirs centered around your family's experiences that Sanel Barnes, an incredible writer and editor from Charleston, is teaching for us. But it's usually 2 or 3 a month. During the Conroy Festival, which is our big annual event, which we just had.
We had several. Yes,
we had, 8 of them? And I think more than half of them were actually in person, but it was still possible to Zoom in to be a virtual participant. We had our first ever songwriting workshop during the festival.
Wow, you cover it all.
Yeah.
Yes, poetry, fiction, nonfiction.
Now,
and we also do some classes that aren't so much generative, but they are about the profession of authorship. So about how to be published, or how to find agents or editors or freelancers for those writers who are sort of looking to cross the threshold and be published. We do a lot of resource classes around that as well.
And do you do like beginners classes, those that just want to start from the bottom and work their way up through a writing course?
We have done some, as we would say, creativity classes for people who say they want to be a writer but don't know how to put the first word on the page. And those are very exciting too. It's nice to see how far somebody can come in an hour or 2 if they're guided, if the experience is guided, because it's in there. The story's in there. Conroy believed we all had a book, as he would say, a story at least.
Right.
And it was dying to get out. And it's great when you can see that actually happen in real time for a writer.
That's great. That's great. And this is the question for both of you again. What one single piece of advice would you give an aspiring writer?
So this is great. This is a question that I ask every single author interview that I do. That's something I get to do for my internship. That's really me, is get to talk to authors and ask them my questions. And I always either end with or near the end sneak in there that question of what advice would you give to a writer or an aspiring writer? And a shockingly large number of times lately, I've gotten the same answer in different ways. And they've all said, go live your life. I felt like, oh my gosh, am I lame? They were all like,
you know what? That actually makes sense, but go ahead.
It makes so much sense. They all said, and lots of different ways and from different perspectives, essentially the same thing, that go out, live your life, have adventures, make relationships, do things so that you have something to write about.
Exactly. The experience.
And it makes a lot of sense. And I think that it's difficult when you're looking at writing as a career to be told you can't write all the time, you have to go live, but it makes a lot of sense.
And the first thing I'm a late bloomer. My first book was published at 54.
Well, and exactly,
That's
we've talked to some authors that I think have a similar story to that.
I had plenty to write, but I still had a lot more living. Well, I still have a lot more living, but I needed the experience behind me, so I had something to write.
Yeah.
The first person that I talked to like deeply about writing was Stephanie Austin Edwards, Mrs. Coffin, that I mentioned earlier, and she lived the most vibrant, incredible life. Like she worked on Broadway and she was a dancer, and then she did costuming and that kind of thing and all sorts of incredible things. And she lived this incredible life. And then she became a writer sort of after the fact, like truly sitting down and writing her book, What We Set in Motion. It's wonderful. You should read it. But it was semi-autobiographical. She wouldn't say that, but looking at her life and looking at the character, it's sort of like that. So even from the beginning of my writing mentorship with, any writer, that was kind of the message that I was being given was, go live an incredible life first.
I like that. That is really good advice. And Jonathan, what's your advice?
So I don't disagree with that. I love that advice, but so as not to just repeat it, let me give the advice that I love to give to writers too, and that Pat once gave to me. The best thing a writer can do is read, and not just read for the sake of absorbing a story, but really study it. Study how a story is put together, then study how a chapter is put together, then a paragraph, then a sentence, then a phrase. Really get under the hood of literature, of language, and appreciate it for what it is. This amazing capacity for words to get into our hearts and our minds. That's incredible. But figure out how it works and figure out what you're drawn to, what stories and what writers you want to read over and over again, and then figure out why, and really just dissect it until you've got the pieces in front of you, and then you can start to put them back together in a way that's uniquely your own. You can start to figure out what your voice is and what you have to say when you've taken the time to appreciate what somebody else's voice is and what they have to say. And as an editor, and an editor for writers of seemingly all ages these days, it's so spectacular for me to see that moment when it starts to happen, when somebody goes from copying a style that they enjoy or sort of mimicking the voice of a writer that they admire to forging their own voice, to sort of jumping that starting point and landing on their own 2 feet. And I've seen that in Holland's work. I've seen that in a lot of young writers I work with, but also a lot of not so young writers who, like you, Tina, kind of waited for whatever reasons, but the story was there. The story needed to come out, and they needed to be at a particular level of writing before they felt that they could honor that story. So it's been an absolute honor to help them get there. Whether or not I ever get myself there, that's it comes up quite a bit. I should be doing much more of my own writing than I am. I love what I'm doing. This is not a complaint, but
you are helping so many. I mean, what you do for the book world, the literary world, I'm thankful. I mean, there's so many people that are thankful for what you do. So
thank you, Tina.
I really appreciate you. And you talk about reading the books and dissecting it.
Yeah.
And it brings me to I've always loved to read. I was brought up with books. We never had a TV in the house. But since I started writing my own books, what you said, Jonathan, is completely true. My habits of reading are a lot different now that I'm actually writing. And I find myself paying attention to the first few sentences of the book. Did it draw me in? And if not, what was missing? Little things like that. Or if I'm reading a paragraph and I'm finding my mind wandering, what is missing in that paragraph? Right. Why is the author losing me? Yes. And then if I find that I cannot wait to turn the next page, why is it grabbing me? So these are questions I never paid attention to when I was, just reading books and not really writing. So that makes so much sense.
There was a writer whose name I cannot remember at this point, so I'm sorry I can't give credit where credit was due. But he once said, the secret to good writing is to not write the parts that people skip over.
Oh, that's good.
Right? Which you can't just instinctively do. You have to understand why people skip over sections, what the momentum of a story is, so you can focus solely on that.
Well, Pat Conroy, he's known for a lot of quotes. And there's one that I like of his. Actually, I had to write it down, but it's, writing is the only way I have to explain my own to myself.
Mm-hmm.
This one, writing is the only way I have to explain my own to myself.
Yes.
Makes a lot of sense.
Pat said around his 70th birthday, too, that his roughly 50-year writing career had been a voyage inward, an attempt to understand the guy he saw in the mirror every day. And he wasn't sure he was any closer after 50 years than when he started. But he said it was the voyage that counted. It was the effort that counted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. I want to talk now about the festival that you have every year.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want you to just give me a little insight what people can expect, when it happens. And I was part of it. I was privileged to be a part of a guest speaker for your panel. I really enjoyed that. But you also have like guest authors. But I'm going to hand it back over to you and just give me some insight on the annual festival.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can tell you sort of the origin story of the festival and then give you some examples of sort of what it includes. We had a 70th birthday party for Pat Conroy 70 Festival, October of 2015. And I had organized this for Pat with a few friends here in Beaufort, with the University of South Carolina, Beaufort, and a bunch of community partners. And Pat was kind of reluctant to let us do this. He was not a person who really sort of embraced his fame, nor the idea of being a 70-year-old man either, to be honest about that part. But he had agreed to be on stage like 2, maybe 3 times for this over the course of this 3-day weekend, in which we were going to bring in authors who were part of Pat's story in one way or another. They were writers he had influenced, or people from his circle from publishing. So it was this great big festival, but it was also a chance for readers to come from all over the country, to some degree all over the world, and just say thank you to Pat for telling his stories, for living his life. And in the end, Pat really embraced that. And even though he was only scheduled to be on stage 2 or 3 times, he ended up being in the audience virtually every other time. He came to everything.
Wow.
And it was wonderful to see how much that meant to him to get to be celebrated, and for him to celebrate his readers, for him to really get to say thank you to those folks. So at the end of that festival, after Pat came off stage, after the second standing ovation, and he and I were backstage, I got to ask him a question that people had been asking me really for the full length of the festival. I went up to him and I said, Pat, people really loved this, and I can see it meant a lot to you too. Can we do this again next year? Can we make this an annual event? And he laughed this great big Pat Conroy laugh, and he put one hand on each of my shoulders, which was a Conroy power move. He did that all the time. Looked me square in the eye and said, "Over my dead body." And that was this, dark humored Pat Conroy. But 3 months later, I was standing over the dead body of Pat Conroy, who had passed away a few months later. So I like to think that having the festival is sort of honoring Pat's wish behind backstage. So it's become this thing that began with Pat when he was there to take part in it and really give it his blessing. And before he passed away, he did, in fact, bless the idea of the festival continuing. So now we're into our 6th year? Yes, our 6th annual Pat Conroy Literary Festival. And it gets bigger and bigger every year. It's, in terms of in-person events, it's all over the county, all over Beaufort County, not just here in the town of Beaufort. But by virtue of having a virtual audience, we now have programs that people can participate in remotely as well. Everything is live streamed or recorded, and the workshops are on Zoom. So you don't have to be physically present in Beaufort to take part in this. But we've been able to host writers initially who had connections to Pat Conroy, but it's definitely outgrown just that model. And now it's inclusive of writers who have that same sort of generosity of spirit that Pat had, that they're really here to honor the readers, and to celebrate the big themes of Pat's writing: truth-telling and conservation and education and family. and they have something important to say about those topics. And many of our writers are Pulitzer Prize winners, New York Times bestsellers, folks at that level, and that's awesome. But Pat's circle of friends was much more inclusive than that as well. So it's so nice for our festival to also be a conduit for highlighting local writers or lesser known writers as well, people who are just beginning the arc of their writing life, and that there's an educational component, that there are workshops is very important as well. So all of those things really began when Pat was here, and we were trying to honor and celebrate a life very well lived for his 70th birthday. But that continues now every year. And that's one of several annual events that we host. The one that you were part of, Tina, that you mentioned was our Lowcountry Book Club convention.
Okay, that was it. Yeah, sorry. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Which I think is in its fifth year now, fifth or sixth as well. And Holland's gotten to take part in a few of those also. And those are really special events too, because they're really about honoring the relationships writers have with readers. That's a very reader-focused kind of event.
It went on for quite a few days.
It was, yes, it was a very big event this year too.
It was. I was impressed. And Holland, you have done poetry, but you also do fiction. Do you write stories too?
Yes. Particularly for the competition that you mentioned in my bio, that's the Ann Head competition, which honors one of Pat Conroy's mentors, Ann Head, who taught at Beaufort High briefly as a creative writing teacher. And I wrote fiction for both of the stories that I entered into that. The first year I got to be finalist, which was awesome. And the second year,
congratulations.
Thank you. So I do write fiction, mostly fiction and poetry. I guess journaling can be nonfiction if it's quality writing, but it's not usually. So yes, I do. I love poetry though. Poetry is probably my preferred writing, I would say. For me, I like to write.
And I know that you're still at high school. You're a senior, which I still find unbelievable, but I'm going to believe you. Do you think, and you're an intern, do you think you'll have a future with writing, or do you know what path you're going to be taking?
I can't imagine that I won't write. Mm-hmm. I know that's a backwards answer, but I don't know if I'll be a writer exclusively. Okay. I actually expect that I won't be, at least initially. Maybe if I come into that later in life, that would be wonderful. As you know, a full-time, that's what
you gotta live first, right? That's right. You gotta live first. You gotta live your life.
I want to live, and I have lots of things that I'm passionate about, and I think stories relate. I think that's kind of the conjoining points of a lot of it is stories, and that's something I hope that is a significant part of whatever I end up doing next, whether it be advocacy or nonprofit work, or anything really. I hope that stories is kind of my legacy with that. But I hope that I get to write. I hope that I get to write my own stuff. That's
I know you will. I think you will.
I hope so.
I think you will. I can see it. I can see it. I do want to just pop this up from Denise for you to see. I'm not sure if you saw this. She says, I'm so intrigued by the Center's involvement in not only preserving Mr. Conroy's legacy, but what you have continuously and tirelessly accomplished for all of our authors, inspiring authors, as well as the children who visit in wanting to learn about this wonderful place. I just wanted to make sure you saw that.
That's so great. Nice. Thank you, Denise.
Yeah.
Specifically on the topic of children, I mentioned that we're teaching some fourth graders here tomorrow. Yeah. But beyond that, we have a Camp Conroy. We have a summer camp 2 weeks every year held at what's now Beaufort Middle School, but it was Beaufort High School when Pat was a student and a teacher. So we are teaching brand new generations of writers and artists, for that matter, too, in the same classrooms that had been so important, so transformative to Pat. And Holland's gotten to participate in that one year, the year that we were virtual, that we did our virtual Camp Conroy.
I got to counsel.
Yes.
It was wonderful.
It was.
I do want to just give, because I just saw that we're running out of time here, but Holland, I want you to just fill us in on your organization that you started in high school.
Yes, ma'am.
And it is now the biggest?
Yes, ma'am. It is.
Give us a little history on that. I'm intrigued about this.
Okay, I'll try to do a quick version because I tell this story super.
Don't leave anything out. Just the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, so during the Black Lives Matter movement, that was a significant part of my 2020 experience. Over the summer, in our town, you could see kind of the shift, and we had marches, and it was really, really powerful to witness and be a part of. And later in 2021, we had our March 4th event, and it was at this March 4th. So this is pretty recent, actually. It's crazy to think that we're in the same year that all of this happened. It feels like so much has happened since then, but it was in 2021, this year, that we had a March 4th event. And we had lots of wonderful authors, many of them discussing race and equality in the history of our country. That was definitely a central theme of our events. And one of the speakers that we had was Anika Noni Rose, who is a Disney princess, which is really awesome. So of course I was on the edge of my seat the whole time listening to her. She voiced Tiana and the Princess and the Frog. And she's brilliant and inspiring and a wonderful, captivating speaker. And she was talking with some of the other contributing authors to a book that they had created and edited together that was called Meeting at the Table. And it was discussing the history of our country and how we are supposed to move forward. So they were discussing this. And one of the things that she said was, she was speaking to white people when she was saying this. She was saying that you have to start doing the hard work yourself. She had been talking about how tired and burdened people of color are and were and will continue to be in our country until we start taking responsibility and amplifying the voices of others and doing the hard work ourselves. So that struck a chord in me, and I don't know why. I can see it so vividly in my mind, like the whole picture of that day and that specific moment. And I remember going home to my parents after this long day, and I was so tired, and I started crying and I freaking out, and I was like, Mom, Dad, I need to do something. Like, I'm not doing anything. I need to do something now. And they were like, you need to chill. And they basically said, you don't need to do something now. It'd be great if you do something later, but you're a high schooler. You just need to graduate and let's pass.
Concentrate on school, right?
Exactly. They basically were like, that's awesome. And we agree, but maybe not right now. And I completely ignored them. And a presentation for this idea that I had called the Diversity Awareness Youth Literacy Organization. We call it DAYLO because that's the acronym, and it's a lot easier to say. I started putting together this PowerPoint presentation of my wonderful acronym and my logo that I came up with and my mission statement and my vision and all of this kind of stuff. And I hadn't really told anyone about it. It was all just happening kind of, on the computer, just me. And I had this whole big vision, and I showed my parents, and they were like, oh, so you did do a thing. And I was like, so I brought it to my school administration, and I asked if I get a sponsor for this, like if I get, you need a teacher advisor. I was like, if I get an advisor for this, will you let me do this? And they were like, yeah, sure. If you do all the work, yeah, you got it. So they let me start it, I guess. And so I had to start recruiting members and doing all sorts of PR, basically networking, trying to get this off the ground. And I had an influx of members so quickly. It was kind of over spring break that I was really launching it. And so I was like emailing people and texting people and calling people saying, hey, this is really, really cool. Please do this with me and my friends. Please join this organization so that we can start conversations about race and diversity and storytelling. And of course, I asked Mr. Haupt, I was like, hey, can the Conroy Center be a partner? And he was like, yes. So we've gotten to do, we would not be anything like we are without the center. I'm endlessly thankful for the connections that the center has fostered for us, that we get to talk to authors, that none of that would really happen without the center. To have people come in and speak to us, mostly through Zoom, and we're lucky to have that. It's really worked out beautifully in time and place, and because of the center, that it's become what it is. And I'm really excited to start spreading it, which is our next step. And I guess that can be a story for another day. But we're hoping to look to expand it throughout the state. Big goal, but I hope that it happens.
You are on your way, it seems like.
We get to talk about DAYLO to our state's two statewide English teacher conferences in January and February. And that's pretty amazing. I thought we would be really fortunate to get accepted into one of those conferences, and we immediately got accepted into both. But that's because what Holland is doing is so timely and important, and teachers and administrators are recognizing that.
And Holland, you are so driven. I'm
Yes.
just impressed. You are so driven at everything you do. You don't give it, you give it 120%.
Yes, ma'am.
You
Can't do anything halfway. Got to do it the whole way.
Yeah, and that is such an inspiration for, many high school students at your school and everywhere else, and kids too, just growing up watching Holland.
So I've got it from all my mentors and my teachers, that drive, and that you can't leave anyone behind.
I think it's wonderful. Your parents have to be so proud.
I think they are. That worked out.
So.
The parent department worked out. They are proud. They got lucky. They've been very supportive.
This has been a brilliant chat. I mean, I could really talk to you for a lot more, but I am gonna be closing it soon. So you have some generous giveaways that you are offering to our live viewers. If you can share with us these generous giveaways that you are offering.
Sure. Well, we're happy to honor all those folks who are tuning in tonight. We're so grateful to you, Tina, and to everybody who's joining us virtually. Then I thought, I had two good ideas and I couldn't decide between them. So I'm not going to be the one who decides. The winner will decide. We're very happy to do a book giveaway. This is Our Prince of Scribes, writers Remember Pat Conroy, which I worked on for quite a long time with co-editor Nicole Seitz, a magnificent writer from Charleston. And there are stories from 67 writers who, like Nicole and I, were mentored by Pat at some point over the course of his roughly 50-year writing career. Beautiful collection of stories, now the winner of 17 book awards, which is just
amazing.
It's the little book that can and so often still does. So I'm very honored to offer a signed copy of this, if that is what our winner chooses to select. But in the spirit of the space that we're in, of the Conroy Center, I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we offered a virtual tour, a Zoom tour of the center as the other giveaway? So the winner will get to choose between one of those two things, either an autographed copy of Our Prince of Scribes or a 45-minute virtual tour of the center, which Holland just told me she's going to do. So
he'll do it.
Great. And then I guess the winner would just connect with you and schedule a time. That works for both of you.
At the winner's discretion. If the winner is the member of a book club or another group, or wants to do this with her or his family, I'm open to all of those possibilities, but we'll happily offer a Zoom tour of our center as the giveaway.
That is brilliant. Thank you so much. I think that's wonderful. And I always, on my chats, do a couple of giveaways too, which I like to do because these readers come and join me every time I do the chats. I appreciate their support and supporting my guests. So I always like to give them a little something in appreciation. So I always give away a box of Yorkshire tea. My Cuppa A Natter show. This is the tea that I drink, and this is the only tea I drink. So this is what they'll be getting. One will be getting that. And then I also do a $5 Amazon gift card giveaway. For that one, I ask that they go to my author page, and from there they share this chat. Share it with your friends, share it with your groups, share it wherever. Just share it and tag me, and you will be in the drawing for a $5 Amazon gift card. But you have to share the video and tag me in order to be in that giveaway. So we got to get that word out, right?
That's a great plan. I love that.
But Holland, Jonathan, this has been amazing.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.
I really enjoyed it.
Great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I hope to have you back. Keep me updated on what's going on at the center. And I'm going to come to South Carolina one day with my husband, and we are going to come see you guys.
Sounds great.
We would love that.
I would love it. Top of my list. And Lovitas, thank you so much for being with us, as always. And we will see you soon. Good night, everybody.
Good night.